Hi there, my name is Miles Hartley with Delicious Real Estate. Today I wanted to make a video that breaks down the real estate transaction flow. If you're anything like me, you like to see what's behind the scenes. If you watch any HGTV real estate show, you'll see an agent that takes a couple out to see 3 homes and they're supposed to pick one of these 3 options. Now these shows are entertaining and I do like some of them, but they are pretty far from the truth. So today I really want to break down the different roles that each player plays in the home buying process and also the home selling process. So you'll know exactly what happens behind the scenes other than just going to look at houses. Now I will go into more depth in some of my other videos about what happens in some of the specific steps. Now I want to tell you that everything goes smoothly every time. And this video is assuming that everything goes right, but things do happen, and real estate deals with people, and people are not perfect, and so things do happen, hiccups happen. So just be patient along the way. Now, if you have a good agent and you have a good lender, really everything should go pretty smoothly. So keep that in mind as you're going forward. You're going to want somebody, even if you're not normally the type of person that likes a lot of help or you like to do things on your own. It is very helpful to have an agent and a qualified lender that's really going to help you through this process. Now, there are things that I will cover a little bit later on, and I'm going to break down this flow chart so you don't get overwhelmed in a couple different steps. But the most important thing I want you to notice is there's going to be 3 different columns. There's going to be the seller, there's going to be the buyer, and the lender. And you can see it's kind of different color coordinated, and these different sections are going to show you basically whose role is whose. And so you'll know exactly, if you're the seller, this is basically what you're doing. If you're the buyer, this is what you're responsible for. And if you're a lender, I hope they know what they're doing. But you'll know what they're doing through this video. So I'm going to break it down for you. No need to get overwhelmed. And we'll go from here. So let's get started. So as you can see, I've actually broken down the process into a few more steps. I've started at the very beginning. So it'll start from the time that the homeowner decides to sell their home, and the buying side will start when potential buyers are ready to get the home buying process started and meet with an agent. Now, we'll do it left from right because there's really got to be a house for sale before there's a house to buy. Now, if you look at the seller side, you'll see a couple different things. The listing agent will meet with the sellers and they'll present what they call CMA, a comparable market analysis, which is basically research into the neighborhood and which homes have sold recently, and it gives the agent a better idea of what price that the home would sell at. At that point, they will speak with you about what they think the listing price should be, and you'll have time to decide if you want to work with this agent and list at the price that they think it'll sell at. At that point, you'll sign a listing agreement, which basically says that you're only going to list the property with that one agent. And from there, it will go live. So the agent will list the property on the multiple listing service. At that point, the MLS will syndicate the listing to thousands of real estate websites like Realtor.com, Zillow, and many more. And the agent will start advertising and marketing the property to get things going. Now, sometimes agents will do open houses and private showings, all this just to stir interest in the house so that a potential buyer can come buy the house. Let's get over to the buyer side real quick. And like I said, it's going to start when the buyer meets with an agent. Now, buyers really should have what they call a buyer's consultation. And at this meeting, the buyer's agent will sit down with the people looking to buy a home, and they'll talk about their needs and their wants and really get to know that person on a level where they feel comfortable searching for a home for them and helping them out through the process. Now, if you haven't already gotten what they call pre-approved, normally the agent will have different lender connections that you can ask about where you can talk to them and see which lender is best for you. So then at that point you will speak with a lender. The lender will sit down with you, very similar to the home buyer's consultation, but theirs is going to be more on the finance side where they look through your financials and really see what's going on and evaluate your situation and see how much you can actually afford as far as a house goes. Now, you'll see lender pre-qualifies buyer, so that's where they get started. 2 things can happen. If you're unable to qualify, most lenders will give you some action steps. So they'll get you started. Maybe you need to get rid of some of your debt. Maybe you need to get your credit score higher. But you will get an action plan from that lender, and they'll guide you along the way so that one day, maybe it's 6 months, a year, 5 years, however long it takes, your situation will be better to the point where you'll qualify to buy a home. Now, say you did qualify, the lender will issue what they call a pre-approval letter. And the pre-approval letter is essentially a preliminary agreement from the lender or the bank that says we're willing to give you this much money. And when you eventually place an offer on a home, the seller of the home will want to see this letter to make sure you're actually good for the money that you say you are. Now, if we get to the next step, let's look at all of this in the flow. So we've talked about how the seller gets started, how the buyer gets started, and then where the lender comes into play. Now, at this point, you'll have your pre-approval letter, and at that point, you're ready to go shopping. So the buyer's agent should be sending you listings along the way and really defining exactly what you want. Now, the best advice I can give you is to see a bunch of different homes. It's really important to see the different conditions of different homes you can get, what different price points will buy you. And so you'll see here, you'll go shopping with the agent, and once you find a home that you really like, you'll make an offer on the home. So your agent will help you submit that offer. I will make a video of exactly what goes into an offer, and I'll also go over the contract that you use to submit an offer. And then you'll see right here, the agent will write the purchase contract, and at that point, the buyer's agent will send it over to the listing agent who has the home, and the listing agent and the seller of the home will have a chance to respond. We'll go from there in a second, and that's really where things take off and start to go a good bit quicker from here on out. So you found your dream home. At this point, a couple different things will happen. Like I said in the last slide, you decided to place an offer on the home that you like. The buyer's agent communicates with the listing agent, and they submit the offer that you have and give it to the listing agent and the seller. At that point, the seller and the listing agent will talk and discuss if this is a good offer. Now, there's really 3 different outcomes that can come from an offer, and the first is that they will accept the offer. Now, this doesn't happen that often, that the seller will accept the offer as it is, but it can happen. So you could place an offer for, say, $100,000. The seller could come back and say, great, $100,000 sounds perfect, and at that point you'd be in contract. Now, the negative outcome of what could happen is they could decide to reject your offer completely. Now, this doesn't normally happen unless you give them a lowball offer or there's something kind of off with your offer. They'll just completely turn you down and decide not to counteroffer. Now, the third thing that can happen, like I said, is the counteroffer. Now, this is pretty common. Say you're trying to buy a home that's listed at $110,000. You come in with your buyer's agent and say, hey, we'll give you $100,000 for that home. The seller and the listing agent discuss, and they decide that $100,000 is not going to work for them, that they would rather have $105,000 as opposed to the $110,000. And so they're willing to negotiate with you and work with you, which you'll see right here. Now, this does sometimes take a couple different days to really work out the kinks in the contract. But once the negotiation is done, hopefully there will be an accepted offer, and that's when the contract's accepted. And from there, you are on your way to owning a home. Things really start to speed up from here. So as we move on to part 2 is going to be from contract to close. Now, let me remind you, in part 1, we went from the very beginning of the process to the point where the buyer placed an offer on the home, the seller received the offer, and now the buyer and seller are negotiating. Now, assuming that part 1 went well and the negotiations went through, the seller will accept the contract, and they will officially be what they call in contract. At this point, a lot of different things happen, and they happen really quick. Now, before we get started, I do want to go over a couple different definitions that will clarify a few things that I will talk about here in a few minutes. Now, we'll come back to the definition a couple different times, as I'll have to reference back to show you a couple different things. But the first one I really want to show you right now is going to be the contingency. And contingency is dependence on chance or on the fulfillment of condition. Now, the key here is fulfillment of a condition. So if we go back here and look, remember up here where we made the offer, in our offer, in the contract, there's going to be different things that the sale of the home is contingent on. So there's many different contingencies that can come into play, but these right here in this middle part are normally going to be the most common contingencies. Now, these contingencies will have to be removed in order for the sale to continue and for the sale to go through. There's a lot of different things that have to happen, and you'll see in the contract, which I'll make another video that goes over a contract, and I'll highlight the different areas that you should look at. But all the different contingencies will have to be released and handled in a certain amount of time. So the inspection, insurance, appraisal, all this has to happen in a very timely manner to show that you are serious about buying the home, because in the case that you do not remove the contingencies, the deal can fall apart and you could lose the home that you went in the contract on. So as we move forward, we'll see a couple different things. Let's move over to really the first step. So like I said, we're going to start with the seller side over here. Let me remind you, you've got the sellers in gray. Over here in the white is going to be the buyer role. And then over here is what the lenders are going to do once you go into contract. Let's take a look at the seller's responsibility over here. We are over here now with the seller's role, and this is their part in making this deal happen. The contingencies that have to be removed on their side, so with the listing agent and the seller, in order for the deal to go through. Now, there's much less responsibility on the seller side. When it comes to the buyer, there's a lot to do. So just stay tuned for what the buyer has to do here in a second. The seller, once you go into contract, they will have a couple days to provide the property disclosures. Now, a lot of times the property disclosures will be sent with the offer, so a lot of times you'll see the property disclosures before. Now, the RPD, which is a residential property disclosure, is a pretty standard form that the seller has to fill out to disclose any known issues with the property. Now, I'll attach a blank copy of this so you can check it out and see exactly what's on it. But there are certain things that aren't on the RPD, and sometimes the seller doesn't know of problems they have at the house. So it's really up to them to answer it to the best of their ability. So sometimes it can be very accurate if they know their house very well, and sometimes it's not as accurate just because they don't know much about their own home. So it says they have to facilitate the property inspections. Yes, they do have to be present for the inspections. They don't necessarily have to go to the home inspection. A lot of times they'll still have a lockbox on the door, and the seller can just let the home inspector come over and do the home inspection for the buyer, which I'll cover the home inspection over here in a second. And then right here, the inspections and conditions removal. So basically that's it for the seller side. Very easy. They're basically there to cooperate with the buyer and all the things that they have to do. So let's move on to some of the first parts of the buyer's role and what it takes for them to remove these contingencies. So one really important thing when you go into contract is the inspection. Now, a lot of people will want to save money and forego an inspection, but honestly, it's in your best interest to get an inspection. Now, the inspection will be a pretty detailed report where the inspector will come out to the property, look over the property from the basement to the roof, and see the condition of the house and see if there's anything that the normal person wouldn't notice. Now, remember when I said that you have to remove this contingency. So imagine you go into contract on a house and you didn't realize that the foundation was in terrible condition. Imagine you get the inspector come out there. Normally it's 10 to 12 days, just depending on the timeline. You get the home inspector to come out there and they check it out and say this foundation, the whole house is no good. At that point, you technically would have an out from the contract. So you can essentially get out of contract if it is for a valid reason. You can't get out of it just because you want to normally, but if there was something wrong with the house that was uncovered in the inspection, you would know and would be able to essentially back out of the deal before you get yourself in trouble with a lemon house, a house that's got a few problems. So once the inspection is done, that will remove the inspection and condition removal. And then over here, this is something that the homeowner normally does. If you got an insurance company that you work with for your car and really anything else you've got, a lot of times they'll sell home insurance to speak with a bunch of different companies. They do a lot of different things, so it's really important to find an insurance agent who can really help you find the best coverage for your house. Now, a lot of real estate agents do have connections with home insurance companies too, so feel free to ask your agent really what to look for when it comes to a home insurance agent. So let's move on real quick to the lender side. Now, there's going to be a couple different things that happen. So once you go into contract, normally the lender will contact the buyer again, and sometimes vice versa, but the buyer will speak with the lender and submit a formal loan application. In this loan application, this will be a much more detailed application that will look at the buyer's financials in more in-depth analysis. You'll see a couple different things happen here. So right here, loan process. So the loan officer at the bank, the lender will be gathering documents from you, pay stubs. They're going to look at your history. They're going to look at a bunch of different things and really get all their facts straight so that they can send it to someone they call an underwriter, which is there to assess how much risk you are to the bank of not being able to pay and the bank having to take the home back. Now, you'll see here we start the loan process, and you can go here and you can go here. The loan officer will actually order an appraisal. Now, an appraiser is going to be a professional who comes out to the home, and they are trained to assess the condition of the home and really give an accurate estimate of how much the home is worth. So the bank is trying to protect themselves by making sure that the loan that they're giving is actually worth the same amount as the house. So oftentimes, say you're buying a house for $100,000, a lot of times the buyer's lender will order an appraisal, and the appraisal will come out there and they will think it's worth $95,000. And so sometimes there can be discrepancies between the two. And from there, I will make another video on that as well. But say the house does appraise, the appraiser will submit an appraisal report, and it'll get sent back to the lender. Same time, the lender will provide you with loan status updates. So if you're working with a good lender, they will be in touch with you. They will communicate with you a lot, and they will make sure you're fully informed on what's happening. Really, the worst thing that can happen is to get with a bad lender that just wants to make the deal happen, that just wants sales and doesn't actually care about you. So be careful that you choose your lender wisely, because it can cost you more money if you choose the wrong lender, and more than that, you can just have a really bad experience buying a home. So once they gather your documents, the house appraises, the loan conditions will be removed, and you'll get your final loan approval. As we move on, let's see what's next. Here are going to be a couple different roles that are actually split between the buyer and seller. So as I said, you've got your contract accepted, and over here, the buyer's agent will open up an escrow. Now, if we go back, let's go right back to the definitions. Escrow is a contract, deed, bond, or written agreement deposited with a third party by whom it is to be delivered to the grantee or promisee on the fulfillment of some condition. Now, this is a long definition, but the really important part is written agreement deposited with a third person. So there's a third party involved. And then, as you see, like in the definition of contingency, fulfillment of condition, fulfillment of some condition. So you'll see that right there, that there's a third party that's going to be in the middle of the transaction to make sure everything goes smooth. Now, normally this is a title company that handles the closing, where they have attorneys that can process the legal side of the deal. Let's go back over here and I'll show you what happens again. So we open the escrow and deposit earnest money. Now, your lender will tell you more about earnest money. Let me go right back to the definitions. It's money given by a buyer to a seller to bind a contract. Now, really all earnest money is it's a showing of good faith. So normally it's $500 to $1,000 where you put it in escrow, so you put it in a third-party account, and at this point, you're basically saying to the seller that you're serious about buying the home, and if for some reason you were to jump on a plane and move to Hawaii and get out of the contract for no reason, then they could actually take your earnest money and have it. I mean, it would be theirs at that point. Now, this doesn't happen often because most of the time when people exit contracts, it's for legitimate reasons, but it can happen if you just randomly decide to jump out of the contract. They can take your earnest money. So like I said, you've got the disclosures, the inspections, so all that's been done on the buyer and seller side. And then you got your title search and then the preliminary title report. So a couple different things happen. So like I said earlier, the escrow is normally held by the title company. And the title company's job, I'll show you the definition real quick. The title company's job is to look at the title on the property. So just like a car, it's going to have a title and it's going to have history. And all of this, I'll show you, is going to be put together in a title report. A title report is a legal document that outlines the legal status of the property and related information on its ownership. So it's going to show the entire history of the property and see if there's any liens against the property that need to be removed. Oftentimes, there are tax liens. So imagine a couple years ago, a different homeowner had the house and they didn't pay their taxes. There can be tax liens. There can be what they call mechanics liens. So imagine you had a new roof put on and you never paid the roofer for the job. They could put a lien on your house, which could prevent the sale, that could cause the sale to have a few hiccups along the way. So this is really important to see if there's anything wrong with the title of the property before you actually own the property. So let's go back right over here, and here we are. Right, so all this happens, right? So we're removing the contingencies, and sometimes the inspection will come back and they'll have a few problems. So there is a chance normally to negotiate even a little bit more. So imagine that the house had a faulty roof, that there's something wrong with the roof that wasn't known and wasn't disclosed. And so the buyer's agent would be able to come back to the listing agent and say, hey, look, we realized that the roof was in bad condition and we saw it on the inspection, and we want to know if you guys will do anything to help get this deal closed and to remedy this situation. So this does happen a lot where people ask for certain things to happen. But it's important really it's not so much about asking for petty little things, but it's really more about asking for the big things that really matter, just the big pieces of the home, honestly. A lot of buyers do get picky and think they can ask for little things. They technically can, but this isn't always the best way to go about it. So there'll be some additional negotiations, like it says, if necessary. And then at that point, pretty much all the contingencies are removed, and the escrow verifies compliance of all parties to execute contract. So the title company will get in touch with the seller, and they'll get in touch with the buyer, and they'll make sure everything is still good to go. The lender will make sure you are what they call clear to close. So they'll make sure all the documents, the underwriter has seen everything, that you are actually qualified for the loan. The inspection will go through, so if anything needs to be fixed or remedied, that will happen in the negotiations. And then, like I said, the seller is responsible for the disclosures, but it all comes together at one final point here at the very end. And we are finally getting to some of the last steps before you get to get the keys to your new home. So let's go to the next step. And as you can see, this right here, get keys and moving in. This is what we've been waiting for. This whole time, this whole process from beginning to end, this is it. You get your keys, and the seller, they get the cash for the house, they receive the proceeds and rent back and move. So there's going to be the closing procedures. So you'll actually go into the title company office. Your agent should join you, and they will sit down with you. You will sit down with an attorney, and you will sign a bunch of paperwork, which this process will make the home officially yours. So here you'll see that the loan funding happens. So when the loan funding happens, the lender essentially will wire the money, and it'll get wired through the title company to the seller, and so all the money is being handled correctly. The title office will record it in the county, and they'll make sure that it's an official public record that the property has been transferred into your ownership. And then, of course, you'll have to turn on your utilities and get everything set up for your new home. Now, at this point, you'll be able to take possession, and you'll get your keys to move in. And like I said before, the seller will receive cash proceeds. Sometimes they'll be rent back, and then they'll have to move. So everything, like I said, happens really quick. Most of the time, let me go back right over here. So from the time we get the contract accepted, depending on the type of loan, it can take anywhere from 30 to 45 days for all this to happen. So loan process, you'll see that the seller wants to see that the buyer is pretty eager to get into the office of the lender and to get things started there. So normally there's a couple days where they'll have the buyer will have to go into the loan officer's office and get things started. The inspection is normally going to take, we normally put it at 10 to 12 days, just depending on timeline. If it can be done quicker, then that's awesome. And then the appraisal, you really don't have to worry about that too much. I will say, always ask your buyer's agent about that, because the lender should be ordering the appraisal. But there are a few lenders out there who, will hold up the process a little bit because they're late to order the appraisal. So just make sure that if your buyer's agent hasn't mentioned it to you, that you do mention about the appraisal. And then, like I said, all of this happens in a pretty timely manner. And at the end, like I said, you'll be able to get the keys and move in. So we've been able to break down from the very beginning, so from agents meeting their clients to the very end where you will move into your new home. So I hope this explained the process in a little bit of detail. Now, there's a lot more to the process. This is just kind of the general overview, but I hope to help kind of give you an idea of what to expect. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to give me a shout out. You can call me at 205-613-9629.